It started with what I thought was a routine illness, a sharp pain in my stomach that wouldn't go away, a couple of sleepless nights, a visit to the ER, and suddenly I was admitted for observation. They ran tests, kept me on fluids, and assured me it was nothing serious. But something about this hospital felt wrong. By the second night, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Hospitals are supposed to be noisy. Nurses moving carts, distant beeping, murmured conversations. But at St. Augustine Medical Center, the nights were too quiet. The air felt too still. The fluorescent lights in the hallway flickered just enough to make me feel uneasy. The first strange thing happened around 1:50 a.m. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps outside my room. Not hurried, not the brisk efficiency of nurses on rounds, slow, deliberate, almost hesitant. I turned my head toward the doorway. The room's sliding glass door was partially open, and through the small gap I saw a shadow move past. Not a nurse, too tall, too stiff. I pressed the call button for the nurse's station. No response. A minute passed, then two. The shadow passed by again. This time it stopped. I held my breath as the figure stood just outside my door. I couldn't see a face, only the silhouette against the dim hallway light. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it moved away. I barely slept that night. The next morning I asked the nurse about the figure I had seen. She frowned. "We don't have staff on rounds at that hour. Just security. Are you sure it wasn't a dream?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Later that day, I overheard two nurses whispering at the end of the hallway. "He was out again last night. Did anyone see?" Room 309 called it in, but they're sedated most of the time. Room 309 was right next to mine. I made up my mind. I had to see who was in that room. That evening, I waited until the hallway was empty. I pulled out my IV drip carefully, wincing as the needle slipped free. My legs were weak, but I forced myself to stand. I stepped out into the dimly lit hallway. Room 309's door was slightly ajar. I hesitated before pushing it open an inch more. The room was dark except for the glow of the heart monitor. Then I saw him. A man, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. His hospital gown hung loosely off his skeletal frame. His hands were clenched into fists, the skin on his knuckles stretched too tight. I should have left, but I couldn't move. Then he turned his head toward me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, unblinking. His mouth opened slightly, like he was about to say something. Then a nurse appeared behind me. "You shouldn't be here." She grabbed my arm, firm but gentle, and led me back to my room. "That patient needs rest. You should focus on getting better." I wanted to ask her who he was, but I didn't, because when I glanced back, the man in 309 was still staring at me and smiling. The next morning, I asked about the man in 309. "There is no patient in 309, the nurse said flatly. "That room is empty." I laughed. "No, I saw him. He was awake. He was sitting on the bed." The nurse's expression didn't change. "You're mistaken. Get some rest." I didn't believe her. That night, I stayed awake. I listened. At 2:05 a.m., I heard it. The slow, deliberate footsteps. This time, I knew where they were going. Room 309. I forced myself up again, ignoring the nausea rolling through my stomach. I crept to the door and peeked out. I saw him. The man from 309 was standing in the middle of the hallway. He turned, his neck twisting too far, too fast, and stared straight at me. Then he walked away, straight into the locked supply closet. I heard the lock click shut behind him. That evening, I packed my things, determined to leave before morning. I knew I couldn't stay another night. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard my door unlock. Not creak, not rattle, unlock. I turned toward it, heart pounding. The handle turned slowly. I lunged for the door, slamming it shut before it could open fully. My hands were trembling as I pressed all my weight against it. On the other side, I heard soft breathing. Then a whisper. "I see you." The breath was so close, like someone was speaking right into my ear, even though the door was still shut. I stayed there, frozen, until the sun rose. By morning, I checked out against medical advice. I didn't care what the doctors said, I just wanted out. As I was wheeled toward the exit, I passed room 309. The door was wide open. The bed was made. The room was empty. But on the small patient whiteboard, in handwriting that wasn't there before, someone had scrawled two words, "Come back." I started my residency in emergency medicine full of excitement, ready to take on the chaos of a level 1 trauma center. St. Vincent's had a reputation, not just for its excellent training program, but for its history. The hospital was built in the late 1800s, originally serving as a psychiatric institution before being converted into a general hospital. Some of the older nurses whispered about the basement, where outdated records and unused medical equipment were stored. "Don't take the night shift alone," one of them warned. "That's when you hear them." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. It was my 3rd week when I was assigned my first solo overnight shift. The ER was unusually quiet. No car accidents, no gunshot wounds, just a few minor injuries. Around 2 a.m., as I was reviewing charts, the red phone rang. The red phone was only for internal hospital calls, usually from ICU, surgery, or psych. I picked it up. "This is Dr. Patel. How can I help?" Silence. Then a woman's voice, soft, strained, barely above a whisper. "Room 636. Please, he won't stop looking at me." A chill ran through me. Room 636? That wasn't an ER room. It was in the old psychiatric wing, a section of the hospital that had been closed for years. "Ma'am, I think you might be mistaken. There are no patients in that room." He's staring at me. Then, click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment before dialing the security desk. "Hey, did someone just call from the psych wing?" The guard hesitated. "Doctor, that line hasn't been connected for years." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Despite my better judgment, I decided to check it out. I took the service elevator to the 6th floor. The psychiatric wing was dark, abandoned, the smell of old disinfectant and mildew thick in the air. The hallway stretched out, lined with locked doors, dust-covered windows peering into rooms that hadn't seen life in decades. Room 636 was at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. I stepped inside. The bed was still there, sheets yellowed with age. An old wheelchair sat in the corner. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain. Then I saw it, a clipboard on the bedside table, recent patient notes. Admission date August 7th, 2023, patient Samuel R. Lewis, diagnosis, paranoid schizophrenia. I felt my stomach drop. That was impossible. This wing had been shut down since 1984. Then behind me the wheelchair creaked. I turned so fast I nearly fell. The chair was facing me now. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached the ER. My heart was pounding, my breath sharp in my throat. "Are you okay?" One of the nurses, Julia, frowned at me. I shook my head. "Someone called from room 636. I went up there and I hesitated. I found a chart, a patient chart from last week, but that wing has been closed for years." Julia's face went pale. She took a deep breath and then, very quietly, said, "That's not possible." Before I could respond, the red phone rang again. I grabbed it, my hands shaking. "Dr. Patel?" Breathing. "Then he followed you." Click. I dropped the phone. Then I saw him, standing at the far end of the ER hallway. A man in a hospital gown, thin, eyes sunken, lips slightly parted like he was trying to whisper something. Samuel R. Lewis. And he was staring right at me. I never got the chance to transfer. That night, I packed my things, determined to leave before morning. But as I walked toward the exit, the lights in the hallway flickered. The red phone rang one last time. I ignored it. But as I reached the main entrance, I stopped cold. There, standing just outside the hospital doors, was Samuel R. Lewis. His hospital gown billowed slightly in the breeze, but his face remained eerily still. His eyes locked onto mine, his lips barely parting, as he whispered something I couldn't hear. I turned and ran back inside, heart hammering in my chest. The security guard at the front desk frowned. "Doctor, are you all right?" I spun back toward the entrance. Samuel was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't leave the hospital either. When morning came, I found a note taped to my locker. 2 words scrawled in shaky handwriting: "You're next." I never finished my residency at St. Vincent's. I don't think I was supposed to.